Please welcome to the stage Charlotte Blank, Chief Marketing Officer, U.S., Range Rover.
Good afternoon, everyone. As a marketing leader, like many of you in this room, I consider myself a steward of our brands. At JLR, we're now a house of brands, a house of 4 distinct modern luxury brands: Jaguar, Range Rover, Defender, and Discovery. Each of our 4 brands has a unique design aesthetic, a unique target audience, and a unique strategy. This house of brands approach is new for us. So what an exciting time to be in marketing. Now, this is a dramatic departure for JLR, and particularly for what was previously going to market as the Land Rover brand. Many of you may recognize how we've shown up in the past. So when we went to market as one brand, Land Rover, our advertising was pretty consistently bringing to life these values of outdoor adventure, animal conservation, international travel and adventure, and the thrill of being outside. I love these old advertisements, and I think many of you are sort of advertising geeks like me, so I'm just going to indulge us all in a little walk through memory lane, starting with my favorite here. This is a Land Rover print ad in the shape, the iconic sort of distinctive asset of the shape of a Defender that's composed entirely of passport stamps, really hitting home that spirit of adventure and international travel. Speeding through a few more, we'd love to tell you about the new Defender, not now, of course. Defender Joyride. This is one of my personal favorites. This was introducing the Range Rover in the 90s. The most beautiful vehicle in the world. I think I actually just gave myself chills just then. I just love that beautiful luxury SUV that's proudly covered in mud. This, quite simply, again, the distinctive outline of a Land Rover product, that being a Range Rover, but it's composed entirely of African wildlife. A similar one in the sunset. And how about this? You thought your teenagers were rough on a car. There was a lot of playfulness, a lot of use of humor, which I think came from a place of confidence in knowing who we were as a brand, as Land Rover, and being consistent with that over decades. But we're in a new era now. Part of JLR's modern luxury strategy and the complete transformation of our brands involves taking us all upmarket, really elevating each of our brands and distinguishing each of those 4 as luxury in their own right. So just a quick look at the modern take on Range Rover is very different. So this is an example of a Range Rover out-of-home asset, and I think it really shows that it's decidedly more elevated, elegant, the pinnacle of modern luxury, reductive design, very much about that exquisite, luxurious feeling you get when you step into a Range Rover. Defender, a recent asset here, also an out-of-home, brings back a little bit of that playfulness, that outdoor adventure. There's a crocodile looming in the side. But you'll see in the forthcoming Defender creative, a little more of an urban grit. We call it urban meets nature. It's outdoor, it's a decidedly outdoor adventurous vehicle, but there's always an element of sort of an urban meets nature or almost a post-apocalyptic concrete jungle peeking through in the background, which we think is starting to bring in a bit of modern cool factor and grit. So how are we going about our journey to differentiate these 2 brands in particular, but our house of 4? Well, as a behavioral scientist, it all comes back to the insights for me. So let's start with what we know about each of these brands and their distinct owner bases. Starting at the surface level from a demographic standpoint, Range Rover owners are pretty remarkable. Just starting with the household demographics, the average household income of a Range Rover owner is now over $800,000 a year in the US, which is staggering, and that number continues to grow each year. Just to put that in perspective, some of the Italian luxury exotics that you know of have a lower household income than the Range Rover buyer. But it's not just about their earnings, it's about how they spend their free time. When we study the leisure activities of a Range Rover owner, we see things like equestrian, sailing, investing in stocks as a hobby. These are very luxurious pastimes. Perhaps I think the most interesting thing about Range Rover owners is that they're 6.5 times more likely than any other luxury automotive brand to be entrepreneurs or business owners. So there's something a little more interesting from a psychological standpoint there that tells us a little more about who they are. These are people with an entrepreneurial spirit who are bold, who go forth and sort of make their own destiny or grow their own empires. So all of these kind of ideas combined that we know about Range Rover owners leads us to call them life's leaders. These are people who know what luxury looks like, and they go out and demand and expect it. Now, Defender is also decidedly a luxury brand. The average household income for a Defender buyer is $435,000. While lower than for Range Rover, that's double that of the Bronco and the Wrangler, which are still competing with the Defender. It's also $50,000 higher than that of the BMW X5, a primary competitor. So Defender's a luxury brand too, with a luxury audience, but how they spend their time is a little different. The short story there is outdoor adventure. When I see these studies, what screams off the page for Defender owners is anything you can do outdoors for fun, you name it. Sailing, mountain biking, skeet shooting, rock climbing, wakeboarding, you name it, whatever sort of outdoor pastime you can think of, they index at 500, 600 in some cases. More, again, than any other SUV brand, luxury or non. And then a little bit deeper about the Defender owner, another insight that we have about them is this notion of self-optimization. Defender owners and enthusiasts are hyper committed to improving themselves. They're really into fitness and not just going for a casual jog or a yoga class on a Sunday morning. These are people who wear fitness trackers, take ice baths to recover, follow specialty diets like keto or paleo or gluten-free, follow podcasts about biohacking and improving and lengthening their lives. They're really about always kind of striving to be on this journey to improve and to optimize their health and their well-being. So we already have some really interesting sort of demographic and a bit of behavioral nuggets about these brands and these owners that have enabled us to start to create these really different paths for the brand. And I think the best way to showcase that is through experiential activation. We have one element called the Range Rover House, which is, I'm proud to say, now a global program for Range Rover, but it started in the US at Pebble Beach a few years ago at Monterey Car Week. Now we see Range Rover houses everywhere from Courmayeur, Saint-Tropez, Dubai. And the idea is that we take over a gorgeous private home that matches the design aesthetic of Range Rover, and we bring together owners and prospects to experience this curated, exquisite event for up to a couple of weeks. And we partner with other luxury brands, spirits, wellness brands, cosmetics, and create these custom experiences for them to get together with one another, share thought leadership and community with other of life's leaders. And our products play a role in the Range Rover houses. We tend to launch a special edition that's available only as a first look to those who attend a Range Rover house. So at this year's Pebble Beach, we had only 17 of a special edition of the Carmel Range Rover were created and debuted at the Pebble Beach this year. And that car retails for $370,000. So it's a big part of the commercial draw of these events, but really the Range Rover house transcends product. It's about the brand and the culture and the community. I like to say, if Range Rover were a house, what would it smell like? What would you eat? Who would you invite? What would you talk about? What would the music sound like for those who were in the previous discussion? So it's a really fun exercise to sort of bring the brand to life in a 360 multisensory way. Likewise, on the Defender front, we have an activation each year called Destination Defender that we've hosted in upstate New York, Somerville, Texas, next month in Malibu. And this is very much an outdoor adventure experience for Defender enthusiasts and community alike to come together and experience modern luxury in the outdoors where Defender people belong. So we offer those thrilling outdoor activities, hardcore fitness, CrossFit partnership, off-roading, skeet shooting, mountain biking, all those things we discussed, increasingly these fitness ideas, but also this modern luxury element of a cooking class where we'll have a Michelin chef come and teach you how to cook over a campfire and make a 5-star meal with your family while you're camping. Or a nighttime photography class to learn how to take gorgeous pictures of the stars at night. So a really special experience just for Defender people to sort of grow that community. But my question for marketers and for people who are sort of enthusiasts like me of psychology is, what if we could go deeper and really dig into people's psyche? So peel the onion back beneath demographic, beneath attitudinal, beneath behavioral, and try to get at psychological drivers. And this has been our priority this year and where I think it gets really interesting. So we've actually invited a group of psychologists to help us figure this out. We've worked with a team of behavioral scientists and some proprietary AI tools to uncover some of these psychological drivers that are decidedly different between these two brands. I'm going to focus in particular on the Range Rover Sport model, which has been a commercial focus for us this year. One of the things we know about Range Rover Sport people, basically who are likely intenders of the brand, that distinguishes them from any other automotive brand is this notion of psychological richness. Range Rover Sport people thrive in the chaos. They like to be really busy and involved in lots of different things, experience life's joys and pains, ups and downs, don't like to be overly scheduled, overly routinized. They like to sort of thrive in everything, have a hand in everything going on. For better or worse, they're highly impulsive. They lack the ability to delay gratification, which is something that has been rigorously tested and compared to other brands. For Range Rover Sport people, they like to go with the moment, go with their gut, make a decision, and be outcome driven rather than overthinking it. So impulsivity is a real predictor of Range Rover Sport consideration. Perhaps that explains some of the behavioral trends we've seen, like gambling and nightclub participation. And a third thing about Range Rover Sport people is the beauty premium. So people who are drawn to Range Rover Sport tend to see themselves as more beautiful than the average person and to receive special benefits for that privilege. Just telling the facts. Now on the Defender side, remember, these are people who look so similar on the surface when you look at demographics and some of the things they do with their spare time, but when you get underneath, there are these interesting differences. So for me, the most interesting insight about Defender is they tend to resonate with this moment of inflection. They may literally be more likely to be switching banks, moving house, starting a family. They tend to be going through a change of some kind. But also just psychologically, they resonate with this idea of always being on a journey, a transformation. They've never quite arrived. They're always going somewhere, becoming something new. You know, maybe that brings a little color to that insight about biohacking and hyperfitness, potentially. Defender people are really involved in community. They like to do things in groups and see themselves as part of a group. We all do to some extent. It's human nature, but this really stood out for Defender and less so for the other brands we studied. And self-optimization, which I think we spoke to in the super fitness. So those were some of the insights we got sort of theoretically from this research. And now we wanted to put it to the test. So the question for us as scientific leaders is, if we could design our advertising assets or creative activations to bring these insights to life, would they outperform our status quo, how we might typically talk about the brand? So I'll give you an example of a test we ran for Range Rover Sport this year that was specifically around product-focused, lower funnel performance marketing campaign. And it started from the TV campaign that we had been running for the previous year, which is called Spillway. It's part of a long-standing tradition of challenges that we do to showcase the incredible power and versatility of the Range Rover Sport. So I'll show you the sort of baseline or status quo condition, which is a short cut down of the Spillway Range Rover Sport ad.
Say that something's impossible. I see that as a challenge.
So that's our baseline. That's a quite successful TV campaign Although we know best practice is not to simply use a cut down of a TV campaign in a performance marketing or a social channel. We're trying to get on our journey of creating sort of fit for purpose assets. So these are coming up sort of rough cuts, mainly for testing purposes, but get to our intent of what we're trying to do with assets that are created with the platform in mind. So on this YouTube test, we compared version A, which you just saw, sort of the baseline, and then one version of a product-focused performance marketing spot, which we call Embrace the Extraordinary.
Embrace the extraordinary and elevate your drive. The Range Rover Sport features a cockpit-like driving position, all-wheel steering, adaptive off-road cruise control, dynamic air suspension, and over 200 new technology patents for you to discover. Engineered to meet every challenge. The new Range Rover Sport. Learn more today.
Okay, so we bring the British accent is sort of a distinguished part of our history. Elevate your drive really speaks to the luxury behind the brand. But let's think about those psychological drivers again. So some of the things we know about Range Rover Sport people: impulsivity, values power was another dynamic, and drive for outcomes. So we tried a third condition. This is a third cell that we tested that we hoped would bring these elements to life a bit more. This one's called visceral.
The only vehicle that is visceral, dramatic, uncompromising. Range Rover Sport. Dynamic air suspension. Adaptive off-road cruise control. All-wheel steering. Cockpit-like driving position. Innovative technologies to enhance your driving experience. Exemplifies power, performance, and agility.
Okay, so some of the differences you might have noticed in that, or maybe you needed to have watched them 40 times like I have, but it's called visceral. And the first word you see is visceral. That word literally means gut. To make a visceral decision is to go with your gut. It's to be impulsive. So we really put that out there. It's a visceral experience. And one of the other words we emphasize is power. This card emphasizes power, and that was one of the drivers, that people value power dynamics. So with some of those elements really brought forth, and I think also that commanding voice telling you to kind of get yours today, we see then which one performed best in this YouTube performance test, and sure enough, visceral was the winner. So the ad that we designed with those psychological drivers in mind showed higher recall versus benchmark and compared to the others, and also drove a substantial lift in consideration, which we didn't even observe in the first two. So I wanted to highlight that both for the sort of psychological nuggets, but also the practice of experimentation, that it's great to have a hypothesis or an idea, but with today's modern marketing tools, we can easily experiment and test those and see what works best. So another principle I want to shift to in behavioral science is called the say versus do gap, which is just one of those truisms about human nature, whether you're talking about marketing or relationships or anything else in your life. Human beings are notoriously bad at explaining, let alone predicting, their own choices. And this is something that plagues us as marketers with all that we try to do from a market research standpoint. It's really difficult to get at people's true intent or what's really going to predict their behavior by asking them to self-report. So a great example of this, and you might be curious why I'm giving you such a strange example, but I promise I'll get there. This organ donor study is one of the most highly cited, most famous behavioral science studies in all of the literature of behavioral economics. And the research is about, these are simple percentages by country in Europe of what percentage of the population is registered as an organ donor. So some of you in this room might be interesting to see we have a mix of Canadians and Americans from different states. We might all have different percentages here. But you see this enormous difference. There's these couple of countries with the red, very, very low enrollment percentages, and then all these countries in the blue with nearly 100%, almost complete compliance with organ donation. And when the researchers ask citizens of these countries to explain themselves and to tell me why did you choose to become an organ donor or not to become an organ donor, people give all kinds of thoughtful reasons that make a lot of sense. They might say something about their family values or their religion or how they might feel should they ever need to receive an organ people have all kinds of reasons to sort of justify and rationalize, or what they think they're explaining, their decision here. But actually, when the researchers statistically analyze this, there's really only one predictor that's driving whether or not someone is or isn't an organ donor, and that is the default setting at the DMV. So when you go to the DMV to get your driver's license, depending on your state or your country or your province, they're going to have a policy in place. You're going to be either an opt-in environment or an opt-out environment. So these countries in red came from an opt-in environment where the default setting was not to be an organ donor, and if you decided you did want to be one, then you had to take an onerous step of checking a box. I mean, that's literally all it takes, but that's a step that everyone in blue doesn't have to take. So people in blue come from countries where it's an opt-out, and the default assumption is that you are. So the point of this study is often to illustrate the power of default settings, but I think it also makes an equally important point about the say versus do gap and how we're so bad at really understanding our rationale or motivation for things. And the say versus do gap applies equally to consumer behavior and to our brands. So we saw this in our study of Defender and Tenders. And when we asked them, what are the features that we should emphasize when we do product spots like I just shared? Which features should we emphasize? You know, there's a billion, technical specs that we could try to jam into a 30-second spot and no one would get through it. So what should we try to emphasize? What matters to you when it comes to buying a Defender? What people say matters are, they basically were allowed to force rank from a choice of all of these different features. And what comes to the very top of what people say matters are things like technology and safety. Those were the two categories that really rose to the top. But when we statistically analyzed which were the factors that, when people checked, correlated or predicted them actually buying a Defender or indicating strong likelihood to buy one, it's entirely different metrics. It's areas in performance and durability, which to me, these features, these categories are the sexy things. They're the fun things to talk about at a cocktail party. It's just like buying a Rolex Submariner and saying, I can take this thing scuba diving down 3,000 feet under the surface of the ocean. No one's gonna do it, but to be able to say that you can is just really fun. And it just drives this emotional impulse to buy the product, even though it doesn't necessarily make rational sense, and thus might not be the thing that people reach for when they're asked to articulate. So now we have this handy list that forms a hypothesis. What actually does work better if we could change our performance marketing assets to focus either on what people say matters, technology and safety, versus what actually predicts their action in these theoretical experiments, which is performance and durability. So we designed a test, this time for Meta. In cell 1, we tried assets that emphasized technology and safety, features that people say matter. And in cell 2, we looked at features that predict action, durability, and performance. Yet again, we see cell 2 outperforms cell 1. Those performance and durability focused assets drive more unique site visitors in a much more efficient way, the cost per visitors, as well as those lower funnel metrics we look at once they get to the site. Do they click around, submit an inquiry, or most important for us, do they configure a vehicle? We find that configuration completes is really important. So by all metrics, we find that cell 2, performance and durability, works better. So do over say. So the last thing I kind of want to leave us with is bringing it way back to the top, because performance marketing is all well and good, and kind of getting into those like really tactical things is important. But I think the real power of marketing is in storytelling. It's in big picture emotional connection with our customers, and starting really at the top with a concept and an idea that brings these psychological drivers to life before we get to the lower funnel. That's sort of my dream for us going forward in collaboration with our UK colleagues, and I think we made a big step this year in the right direction. So we have a new TV campaign for Range Rover Sport that just started running last week. If anybody in here watches live sports, you might have seen it. We're in heavy rotation on a lot of live sport programming. And just a bit of setup for the spot. I mentioned, I showed spillway before. Previously, our tradition has been these challenges showing how Range Rover Sport can drive up a glacier or a waterfall or up the Great Wall of China. These really heart-racing, like incredibly daring challenges that showcase the physical prowess of the vehicle, but they're not very human-centric. You don't really have a sense of connection with a human being or a sense for, identity, that this is a person like me or a brand that I belong to. So I think that's what we're kind of getting to in this new campaign, which is a partnership with Theo James, who's an actor many of you might recognize from shows like The White Lotus or The Gentleman on Netflix, both of which have heavy product integration from Range Rover. So we do a lot of brand integration on those shows and already have a little bit of equity built with Theo. And he's, sort of a charming English guy. There's already kind of a connection there for Range Rover Sport. So let me show you our new TV campaign with Theo, and then we'll talk about it a little bit.
You found it then.
Of course I did. Good boy.
So a couple smiles in the room, and I hope that you've recognized a little bit of those themes there, where psychological richness, but impulsivity. He needed to go get that ball for his dog, so he drove kind of crazily all over the beautiful English countryside and up and down this quiet English manner because he needed to get that ball right now. So he went for it and he got it and he didn't wait around till later to do it. So there's a bit of psychological richness there, impulsivity, and remember the beauty premium. Theo James, I don't think I need to say much more. If my Instagram comments or Microsoft Team chats are any indication from the women in our community. So that's a taste of what's to come, and I just emphasize that we're on a journey, but that's kind of my dream, is to build in a lot more of insight-driven creative work. So just to leave you with a few key takeaways to kind of summarize how I think about these things. One is dig deeper. I mentioned a few times to peel the onion, keep peeling a layer down, because you see these differences arise when you go beneath demographic, attitudinal, behavioral. The more you can get down to the why, the more interesting it gets. The second takeaway is analyze the action, focus on the do, not the say. Leverage techniques we have in analytics to try to get at what actually predicts behavior versus what human beings predict would drive them to act. And then my favorite is experiment. Always be testing, ABT. So we are able to do that, especially with the tools at our disposal in digital marketing. A/B testing is a normal part of our practice. So I encourage you to implement some of these hypothesis-driven tests into probably your normal course of business. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Charlotte. That was awesome. I live in Vancouver, where half the people buy or live.
It is a strong market for us. Yeah.
Drive Range Rovers.
Thanks, Vancouver.
If you have a question, throw your hand up. I just want to quickly, and this is a serious question, is there any more secret sauce to how you advertise towards the really, really, really good-looking people that feel like they deserve special treatment? Is it just showing?
Yeah, it's called Project Zoolander. I can't share.
Is it just showing hot people in the ads? And that's me. I should be in the.
I think that's we're at the baby steps of this. I mean, that is a very literal example of casting a hot person, but also showing a lot of these people's phases. That earlier spot with this, by the way, extremely badass woman, this female test stunt driver who's driving up a Icelandic glacier waterfall thing. It's a pretty awesome human interest story, but what you really get to see is the car. We didn't really go that much into the person, and I think that's the miss from a psychological standpoint.
Awesome. Sorry, hands for a quick question in the front here.
Thanks for the presentation. Other than maybe a survey, what methodologies do you use to tap into the psyche of your customers?
Yeah, that one is actually pretty complex, but we have the psychologists I mentioned are developing these ways of getting at a whole host of academically validated psychological metrics. So take anything like the Big Five personality test, or locomotors versus assessors, or people who are outcome driven versus journey focused. There are lots of these sort of spectrums or dualities that are encoded in academic literature, and they're finding ways to sort of quickly test amongst a panel of people and then layer AI onto that to model them out to bigger audiences. There's also some really interesting publicly available or otherwise data sets that predict some of these psychological drivers. Like my favorite one, given where we are, is mountainousness. People who live in a mountainous region by DMA say that predicts openness, which is one of the big five personality traits, and one of the most important and robust personality traits is whether or not you're open to new experiences or tend to be more traditional and routinized. Being in a mountainous environment tends to breed openness. So there are lots of just fascinating things like that that are kind of being compiled together.
Yeah, we had one up here in the front.
Thank you so much. This was amazing. And I totally agree with you that science is so important and, like figuring out your consumer to the best level. But we know that not all companies kind of have this concern and think that it's as important. So how was the process of making this a priority at your company? And how can we convince people at our companies to make this a priority as well?
Great question. I am just so personally passionate about psychology, and I've always noticed that people in marketing often share that passion for consumer behavior. So I think just finding some of those interesting studies or examples to get people kind of excited about this and remind them that this is ultimately what we're trying to do as marketers, is understand and thus influence consumer behavior, kind of starting from the beginning. But I was also thinking about when we started to compile some of these ideas that we tested, we have a dynamic, everybody in their companies has to deal with, the push and pull of commercial needs and creative desires and whoever makes the spots versus needs to use the spots. And we have the same. And the person who was in charge of making our creative had this beautiful comment that was like, I'm so used to hearing my creative sucks. This is the first time someone's told me what could make it better. Because the insight gave us something that was better than just, hey, we ran it through a recall study and found that it didn't break through. We're actually saying Range Rover Sport people have this beauty premium thing going on. We need more face. We need more beautiful people. Like we actually it gave us an idea for something to add or delete or change, as opposed to just saying, this doesn't work, I don't like it. So that's the other good thing, is it gets us out of the subjective realm.
Hands up for any more questions for Charlotte? Pass that down for me.
Thanks. Quick question about the demos and the products. Kind of a chicken or egg thing. Did the demos come first or did the products come first? Or did it kind of evolve at the same time?
That is a good question. I think everything's evolving. Like there are some classes that are just continuing to grow in wealth, and our products have risen alongside them. So, as our pricing goes up, we're keeping pace with some of those people, but probably also attracting more. It leads us to ask some interesting questions like, should we even be thinking of ourselves as competing with our traditional automotive luxury competitors that are higher volume but lower price point, like the BMWs and Mercedes of the world? Or should we be thinking about competitive purchases being like a boat or a summer house? And that kind of changes how we make some of our decisions. And we're having a lot of interesting questions about wealth and how that's changing and what that really means. Yeah, hard to know.
Any more thoughts? Okay. Can pass that down.
Thanks. Just one question I had. Obviously, like the luxury market is very boutique. And I noticed you had the great Birkin bag at the start there, and there's certain spending trends you can recognize in terms of spending tendencies for anyone that would shop for a car like this. But I'm just wondering, in terms of localization of these larger overarching campaigns, how much do you find your guys having to tailor the creative for, like, say Canada versus the US? And then once you're in Canada, okay, provincially, what does wealth look like, province over province? How much do you have to change that overarching campaign to meet those needs?
Yeah, great question. And who knows how I'd be answering that in a few years with AI when we can, you guys are sick of hearing that. But, even just for that spot I just showed you, the Theo James, there was kind of a fun localization story where the initial version was a little more complex. He's driving through the countryside or the estate, and he sees more things. Like there's more animals, there's another character, there's another woman who goes by on a horse, and there's other things that he encounters. And when we saw some of that added storytelling, we raised a hand in the US and said, we got to dumb this down a little because it's just a different market here. And it's kind of a funny ongoing, good-natured debate between our global leads in the UK and the US that the UK sensibility for creative work tends to be much more abstract, and it allows for more of a lean-in audience and people who are just willing to, really focus in and understand the different characters. And in the US, we just have a really cluttered media landscape and need to kind of hit them right up front with the story we're telling and get to it. So we requested that it be streamlined for the US. So long story short was they made a couple of edits and we had 2 versions. And then the testing that came out showed that the simplification made the spot work a lot better in the US, but the original version worked better in the UK. So it was such a nice reminder that, again, it's not a subjective disagreement. It's there are differences in the markets, and we need to honor those kind of differences in how people consume media. But that's just a really high-level one. Yours about tailoring down to the specific city even. You could even, again, with AI, consider different weather implications, and use more of a snowy terrain versus a desert terrain or a beach environment. So we talk about that all the time, but we're just kind of on the cusp of starting that journey. But another simple one for the automotive space is our retailers are a big part of this ecosystem. We have what we call tier 3 advertising, and they contribute to a lot of the demand generation as well. So we're trying to improve our co-op program this year and make that easy for our retailers to plug into. So got some good feedback on that today from some of our partners. But the idea is that we actually do use an AI-enabled partner that quickly dealerizes the assets. So when we have a new spot like this, it quickly comes up with versions that are optimized for each platform with the dealer's name at the end and website. So that can kind of easily go out. So that's a quick way to scale it and make it a little more locally relevant.
Are Canadians more like UK or Americans?
Good question. I don't know. I haven't seen those test results. I'd love to know that.
Any more questions? Do we have time for more questions, or are we wrapped up? We do have a couple minutes? Okay. Jump you right here.
I just have a quick question. A lot of people redo old Defenders and not Range Rovers. Why have you figured that out? Because old Defenders are sought after big time. And Range Rovers aren't.
Well, there is a big market for the Range Rovers from the 90s. The classics market is something that we're, again, talking about getting into more, but it's not, a big focus for at least my team now. I do know that the Defender, the enthusiasm for classic Defenders is wild, and we see it really come to life at our Destination Defender event where we bring the two together. And just this past month, I think we were really confronted with the reality that the heritage of these brands needs to be brought forward, whether we go to market as Land Rover or not. The Land Rover heritage, Range Rover or Defender, is so strong. And we have this beautiful curated collection of cars driven by or escorting Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. So many of you might know that we have this long-standing history with the royal family. And we have this collection of 10 cars that were like her vehicles. And we debuted that at Pebble Beach last year. It was the first time an SUV has ever been on the Pebble Beach concourse. That was a really kind of momentous moment with a lot of press. But we've taken that on the road. And I've just been blown away by the reception and interest in people seeing these classic old Land Rover product. And we've kind of moved, I think we kind of forgot that a little bit. And now what we saw just last week, having that at Rockefeller Center, this complete takeover with all the old Land Rover classic flags all around Rock Center and these beautiful old cars. It was just such a nice reminder that provenance, that heritage is a big part of the authenticity of the brand. So I think you'll see a little more integration with classics. But I'll have to research the Defender versus Range Rover.
We've got two in the back here. Start with you and then you, okay?
Thank you very much for the presentation. Super interesting. How does it work with collaborations of like-minded brands that fit with the same sort of psychology as a Range Rover buyer? And do you give kind of the leeway to some of your partners and their co-op and do they have kind of almost like a brand book that they have to collaborate with those like-minded brands that you guys see the fit with the brand?
I think that's the future state. So some of the strategic decisions about about the brand book type of questions like that are still kind of being worked on by the global center. But where we've had a little more flexibility to play in North America is in Range Rover houses. And that metaphor of if Range Rover were a house, what would it be? What would you do there? That has been a really helpful creative exercise for us to choose partners and co-create their build spaces, and to think through how to fully differentiate the two brands. So to have these at Range Rover houses, these extraordinarily luxurious facial cosmetic products, and to offer people these free facials as part of their experience at Range Rover House feels right. We had sound bathing there, which was, again, from that previous talk, which I loved. But at Defender, we would make completely different decisions. Like, what would a Defender experience feel like in this modern luxury outdoor setting? Well, people want to work out, they want to exercise, they want to see their data, they want to off-road. So it inspires just different creative choices.
Another question in the back here.
Hi, great presentation. Thank you. Also love psychology. So about I think a bit more than a decade ago, a Jaguar Land Rover went through an acquisition, right? Through Tata Motors. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, and during that time, there was some financial hardships, etc. So I'm curious, how does brand positioning get affected when the brand is going through financial hardships, acquisitions, etc.? Does consumer perception change as well?
I think it can, but in our case, we've been extraordinarily successful. I can only say that in the U.S., we've doubled, tripled our growth and profitability. In the Defender's case, doubled sales last year. So really the sky's the limit so far, but we reward ourselves with really ambitious targets, and we'll see how we continue to maintain this sense of exclusivity and scarcity, and this sense that not everyone can have a Range Rover with these really ambitious commercial targets. So it's our challenge as marketers to do that, to thread that needle carefully. Take a page from Rolex's book, I like to say.
Another one right over here.
So obviously you've put your Range Rovers put themselves in a position of luxury. As a home builder, we also put ourselves in a position of luxury in the production home building. Yet when market gets challenging, how do you stick to your guns? How do you remain a luxury car builder, if you want to call it, as opposed to a home builder? You have the Evoque, you have other products that are somewhat affordable, and we try to create some of that ourselves. However, we want to remain a luxury builder, and we are. But how do you do that? Because you've done it consistently over the years.
It's really the question of the moment as the auto industry is coming back to reality. We had such an unusual time of COVID and then supply chain crisis and limited supply that artificially kept all of this demand pent up, and no one really needed to rely on incentives and discounting like we historically have, and that is over. So just seemingly overnight, our competitors, even super luxury brands like even Porsche, we had never seen brands like this discounting to such an extent. So it's been a real test of willpower. We make some exceptions where it makes sense. We've added some offers where it helps us to move the needle, but we do that really tactfully and tastefully. So we don't advertise it on TV, for example, but we might send offers through CRM or through retargeting people who we know are in market, or we might offer those on our tier 3 websites for low funnel shoppers. So we try to still maintain the integrity of the brand and not overly broadcast when we have those incentives available. But that's a reality of the automotive business, and sort of being managing production and managing retailer supply. It's very difficult to produce exactly the right amount and keep the price exactly right. That's one of the hardest challenges for automotive. And you mentioned we have the Velar and Evoque. We have a couple of products that are a little more entry level for us. But the really unique thing about JLR, and I believe we're the only auto manufacturer for whom this is true, is our highest volume vehicles are our most profitable ones. So it's really Range Rover Sport, Defender. Those are our big focus cars, and that's also what we sell the highest volume of. So that's a really good position to be in.
Last question in the back.
Thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to, I know you touched briefly on the AI issue, but where else do you see AI playing a big role within the company in the future?
So JLR has a partnership with NVIDIA that's a little more tailored to the product and sort of the technological experiences you can have within the product, leveraging telematics data. It's a little kind of outside my scope. I mean, what I've been thinking about from a marketing perspective is really it's creative and giving us that volume of assets we talked about and different kind of experiences. Or the look and feel of different assets. But really it comes down to this marketing mecca of personalized one-on-one communication. And that goal hasn't changed because of AI. It's been the goal since direct marketing was around, that we wanted to send the right message to the right person at the right time. And I do think that this AI revolution is going to be the closest thing to get us there. So the MarTech stacks that we're all building are kind of with that aim in mind of, we know so much about people through different channels, but we know what you're doing on our site, what you're looking at, what else you're doing online, what other sites you're visiting, what other cars you have in your driveway. Through telematics, we might know, hey, you've been opening the back door more, maybe you've had a baby. There are all these ideas and different bits of data and information that need to be collated and created into what's the golden record. And then I think AI will really unleash that personalized journey we've all been hoping for.